This was the infamous or famous buck known as Candyman. Another early season kill, 214 gross inches on this deer, and actually I think he was bigger the year before, and I could see this big palmated side. You know, it looks like a hand, and I knew right then and there it was him, and he was already like 18 yards away. He steps into that gap, I stop him, and I could not get my pin on him. I fought so hard mentally and physically to bring that pin up, and the last thing I remember is bringing that pin up, pulling through my shot, seeing that lit knock going right at the white on his belly, and everything went black.
We are in Wisconsin. I've been told there is a 200-inch deer, a bunch of really big bucks, and we're gonna hear some pretty cool stories. We're gonna knock on the door and see who it is.
Hey guys, welcome. My name's Thomas Mlsna, and this is my Whitetail Crib. I was born and raised on a farm here in Wisconsin, and that's where all these whitetails came from for the most part. I've been hunting like every other farm kid since I was 12 and could legally hold a firearm and follow my family around in the woods. And I think I started bow hunting, I was around 15, 16, right around the time I got my driver's license and could actually like slip away and do whatever I wanted. But I've since, in the last 8 years, went full-time consulting on habitat and coaching clients for whitetail hunting specifically. So you'll see this is the cave, my studio where I do my virtual calls with my clients, and obviously the success that I've had over the years hunting these whitetails in Wisconsin. This is let's actually start right here. So this is the first deer I ever killed. This was a gun buck. And at the time, believe it or not, that was actually one of the biggest deer ever harvested on our farm. So the farm that I hunt is an active dairy farm here in southwestern Wisconsin. I think at this point, we're up to right around 1,500 acres of total land that we manage. About 350 acres of that is pasture / huntable land. The rest is mostly cropland. This was the biggest buck at the time back in 2000. And that really fueled me to get going, obviously, but that was firearm. And I had a high school teacher that shared my frustrations because I wanted to see higher caliber deer. I wanted to see more deer. And he was the one who actually put a bow in my hand. And in fact, this is the first bow I ever had. This came from him. He owned an archery shop. Coincidentally, he sold it to a gentleman who later in life became my brother-in-law, and I bought it from him for a couple $100. I had it set up for bow fishing for a while, but I put it back to its original form just to save it for nostalgia. But that bow killed this deer. And this was the first deer, like I said, I ever killed with a bow. I went many years bow hunting without shooting deer like this because I wanted to see better deer. And, again, 20 years ago, a deer like this was pretty substantial, especially on our farm. So this is kind of the beginning right here. First gun buck, first bow buck. And that's why they're over in this corner, because one, comparing this to some of those other deer makes it look really small. But two, it's just that daily reminder of how things started and, that encouragement to keep moving forward. So if we kind of keep rolling this way, I actually just got back from a western hunt and took this velvet mule deer up in the high country. 12,500 feet of elevation hunting up there. A little bit different from hunting tree stands in the Midwest. But I love it. Pushes me way outside my comfort zone and also adds skills. The spot and stalk game, a lot of guys don't apply spot and stalk in the Midwest, but I've actually killed my last 2 whitetails from the ground. So when you add skills to your toolbox, then you're more likely to use them, I guess. Over here, this is my out-of-state hunting wall, mostly Western animals, Canada, black bear, chocolate phase black bear. These are obviously not whitetails. This is my once a year, leave the state, push outside my comfort zone, much like that velvet muley, but go out and try to find an animal, try to learn new skills, and just get out and explore. These are kind of more adventure type hunts. From here, we can move over more towards the whitetails. This actually is the buck I shot last year. So this is a 170-inch deer here in Wisconsin. I had an encounter with him my first hunt early season last year, and then went back 2 days later, similar conditions, and shot him. What's interesting about this deer is this is the first buck that I have ever killed directly over a food plot, and that was just last year. So of the 20 plus years that I've bow hunted, and however many deer I've killed, almost all of them are in transition zones between food and bedding or downwind side of a bedding area. It's really hard to get bucks, mature bucks like this, to consistently hit food sources during daylight because of the pressure in the area that I hunt. But this buck could not resist this little hidey hole food plot and worked out. Like I was saying before, hunting from the ground, I shot this buck from the ground, actually slipped in, used an adjacent cornfield to access my hunting location, never left the corn, slipped in, carved out a little blind in the corn and set up and shot him from the ground from that cornfield. So this was a really fun experience and just kind of a gnarly deer. I love these early season bucks before they bust off all these little extra tines and all that character in there. All right, so this deer, this was, call it chapter 1 of a 3-year saga in pursuit of what ended up being the number 1 buck killed in the county at that point in time. Now I think is number 3, which we'll talk about in a second. But this buck taught me a lot. I was hunting that other buck, and usually what I do is I give my target buck until Halloween. And if he's not showing up or I don't think he's huntable, then I'll shift from plan A to plan B. This was my plan B buck that year. I called this buck Jaws. He was just a bully buck, 150 class, 10-pointer, real beefy deer. He actually had an injury the year before and was limping really bad throughout the summer. He kind of healed or grew out of it. And then as the rut progressed again, he started limping more and more and more. But what's interesting about this deer, obviously you notice the mount is a little bit unique. I hunted the same exact spot. I moved my stand a couple yards every day. I was hunting it from a climber, so I had to take it down anyways. But hunted basically the same spot for this deer 4 consecutive days in a row. And it was right on the fringe of a bedding area, actually between 2 bedding areas. First week in November. The first day I had him at 15 yards. Actually had a camera arm in the tree, couldn't get a shot, had to let him walk. He went up in this bedding area, circled back around, came in behind me, bumped a doe from a bed, did the lip curl, that Fleming curl where they, you can see it right here, drool just pouring out of his mouth. And then he ignored her and went and he bedded down 50 yards away from me. Eventually he got up and he went and he licked that bed again, started pouring saliva out, and then went up and found that doe, bumped her again and bedded down again. Now the interesting thing was I was set up over this tiny little water hole in the woods, just a kind of a natural depression. It was a warm early November day, which is why I was there. Obviously rut time frame, water, stars kind of aligned. When the sun came up, I realized that there was very little water in that watering hole. A couple hoof prints basically full of water. So I wasn't sure if that was enough that was going to hold deer in the area or not. Also, what I realized when the sun came up, I had initially set up over this pinch point that was an old fence. There was a hole in the fence. And when the sun came up, I realized that a tree had actually went down and now the deer were crossing in a different spot. So I was not in the best position. And when this buck went up into this bedding area, I was worried that evening when he left that bedding area, if he followed a similar trail, he was going to catch my wind. Standing up in my tree stand, I could see the top of his antlers. I got down, got all the way to the ground with a climber. I belly crawled 50 yards, got back up in a different tree, better position for the wind to hunt that evening. I kid you not, less than 3 minutes after getting my bow up in that tree and getting an arrow knocked, this buck stood up and he walked over and he went straight to that water hole that I was previously set up at 20 yards and drank out of it. If I would have stayed there, I would have killed him. But instead, I just watched him. Eventually, he went out into a field and was with those does. The next morning, I slipped back in there again. The next day, back in there again, so on and so forth. So I hunted this deer 4 consecutive days. I saw him 3 of the 4 days. The third day, there was some activity on the neighboring property and a bunch of deer got bumped, and I just got out of there. I was exhausted anyways. Came back in the next day, saw him again. For those 4 days, I was within 200 yards of him almost all day, dawn until dusk, but I could never get a shot. Many times within 50 yards, could never get a shot. Even went in with a decoy, but he was with this doe and couldn't get him to leave the doe. Eventually, I went in there in the middle of the night, actually with a water tote and dumped more water in that water hole, wondering if that's what was holding him there or if it was the does. And then I hung a stand so I didn't have to use the climber and came back in a week later on the right wind, and he was the second deer I saw and I killed him. So this was just kind of a patience, perseverance type thing. But a really unique deer, and I learned a lot. What I learned mostly from this deer was if I would have picked a different spot to hunt that first day, which I almost did, just a couple hundred yards away, a different pinch point, not as close to the bedding area, essentially. If I would have picked that other spot, I would have never seen this deer, and I wouldn't have seen him for 4 days because he didn't leave this 200-yard bubble. I was able to get in and out with a combination of an e-bike and also crossing these fields. One morning, I convinced my dad to spread a load of manure in the morning. So I'd follow the tractor out, using cover, using the topography, using all these things to get in and out. But that taught me a lot about deer movement, specifically during the rut. So if you're ever out hunting a deer and you're not finding him, he could just be a couple hundred yards away and just not moving a whole lot that time of year. So that was chapter 1 of that 3-year saga, like I said. Chapter 2 was this deer. Now, this buck was kind of the same scenario. I waited until October 31st, didn't think I had a good chance at my main target buck, shifted gears, got dialed in on him. And this deer was doing another kind of crazy thing too. He was showing up on one area of the farm, hitting this food plot, but always just after dark. What tipped me off to where he was actually coming from is one day we had a whole bunch of activity on our farm. So I hunt a large farm, like I said, but I share it with 17 other hunters. Usually they're only down a few weeks out of the year, a few weekends out of the year, but it's seemingly random, so it's hard to predict it or plan for it. Anyways, they were down one weekend, driving around ATVs, kind of, let's just call it recreating. This buck still showed up on camera right after dark, even though they were messing around in this valley. So that told me he's probably not bedding super close to this food plot. So I kind of branched out from there, started putting the pieces of the puzzle together, came up with a theory that he was bedding over the hill, and then right at dark, he was transitioning through this little wooded draw and going up and over the open field. The week before gun season, I made an aggressive move, went in after him, and sure enough, he showed up. What got really interesting about this deer is I shot him at 32 yards, I believe. I drew on him 3 times. And every time I draw, he would stop where I couldn't get a shot. On the third draw, he stopped at one tree right over his vitals. So I put my pin just in front of that tree, right where I wanted him to be, and waited. And as soon as he took a step, I pulled the trigger and I hit him just a touch back, kind of through the diaphragm. So we ended up finding him with a dog the next day, and he was still alive. And it turned into a rodeo, and it was chaotic. With having the dog, you can't have a weapon, and there's all these things involved. So I had to get the dog out, and there's all sorts of legal stuff that you have to take into consideration when you use a tracking dog or drone or whatever it might be. Ultimately, ended up going back in, relocating him, and stalking him essentially, and putting another arrow in his bed. So that one was pretty wild. The rest of these, kind of the same scenario. There's a story obviously behind every one of them, but this deer right here, I think, is maybe one of the most unique deer in the basement. Nothing special from a antler size perspective. In fact, I didn't even kill that deer. So that's what's interesting about this story. I shot at that deer and missed that deer. So it was opening day of gun season. I forget what year it was, 2010 or 2011. And this buck came in. I was in total bow hunting mode, even though I had a rifle in my hand. This buck came in 70, 75 yards, bumping some does. I took my time, lined up for a shot, pulled the trigger, and just kind of thought, okay, this is going to be easy. Pulled the trigger, deer's going to go down. Well, I shot. He didn't go down. In fact, he hardly even reacted. He followed the does, and they just kind of walked off. Later on, I got down from the tree stand, walked over to where he was standing, looked back up at the tree, and noticed that I hit a twig and obviously deflected my bullet. Now, that's not the interesting part of the story. The interesting part was that afternoon, I went back to that same general location to hunt this deer, and while I was set up there, I heard 2 shots, somewhat rapid fire, pop, pop, just over the hill from where I was hunting. But if you've gun hunted, you can kind of tell the direction the muzzle is pointed when someone pulls a trigger. And to me, those shots didn't sound right. My uncle hunts in that general vicinity, but usually he's hunting where he's looking down in this creek bottom. So it didn't sound like it was his shot. So I was a little bit nervous yet intrigued with what was going on, and decided to go over there and check it out. And lo and behold, when I walked over there, I found this buck laying in the woods about 150 yards from the line fence of the property. And I was trying to figure out what was going on. I could kind of see some tracks and a little bit of blood and how the deer was laying. And all of a sudden I look over, and right on the line fence, the Amish neighbor steps out from behind a tree. And he sees that it's me. I'd never had a one-on-one conversation with him before. But ultimately I had a conversation with this guy, and I wasn't happy at all, because what I didn't really accuse him. I let him talk. But basically what ended up happening was he saw this buck and he shot it across the fence. Long story short, we had a very direct conversation. I was not super happy, but I kept my composure, and that started our relationship. This neighbor now is a good friend of mine. I actually refer to him as my Amish informant. He goes around to all the other Amish in the community after season and also throughout the season, and kind of takes inventory on what they killed And I also will give him packets of trail camera pictures every year because they can't run cameras, but basically give them a packet of pictures showing them young deer and older deer. I never list them as shooters or non-shooters. I just list them by age class. That has shown them over the years, or at least it did for many years, which produced a lot higher caliber deer. I was just showing them that there's mature bucks out there, and that gave them encouragement and helped them be more patient in passing up a lot of younger deer. And it elevated the quality of the herd in the area dramatically. Again, with Amish neighbors, if they don't know what's out there, then they're going to take whatever opportunity they can. So this is probably one of my most memorable hunts in here. Not a buck that I shot, but the first buck that my son shot just last year. 7 years old, and he put in the time. Our kids don't really play a lot of video games or watch a lot of TV and do stuff like that. They do. You can see part of the basement is where the kids hang out, so a lot of it's Legos, or they're basically trying to do anything they can to spend more time with dad in the woods, so it works out. But my son has spent long days with me in the woods, usually if they're off school and it's during hunting season, rather than sit at home, we go jump in a blind somewhere. And sometimes we see deer, sometimes we don't, because it's not always the best location, but we're out there, and we just sit out there and read books or play games or do stuff on a notepad, play cards, whatever it is. So he logged a lot of hours and he practiced a lot. Got him set up with a youth 243, and when season rolled around, he killed this buck the day after Thanksgiving last fall, and it happened really, really fast. In my mind, I figured I'd talk him through everything, kind of refresh him on where to aim on the deer and help him. And we actually forgot shooting sticks. So I kind of put my arm out to take some weight off and steady him, but for the most part, he had to freehand it, and he made a perfect shot. Deer went down immediately, perfect heart shot. And actually, a few weeks later, he shot a doe, same way, same rifle, different situation. So super proud of him, the time that he put in, and I know he'll be excited to see this on TV, right? But a super, super memorable hunt. And anytime you can get out in the woods with your family, enjoy that time, it's just, there's not enough time, period. So, all right, and then the last wall, I guess if you want to call it the highlight wall, or I call this the plus 20-inch club. A lot of time invested in all these animals, and a really good story, I think, or a really memorable story. And I actually want to start with this one here, because this was the first really big deer that I killed. That one gross scored just a hair shy of 200 inches. It was 198 and some change, and 16 scoreable points, I believe. But you can see just a huge, huge frame on him. That was an early season deer that really taught me a lot about how bucks bed and how they move to and from these bedding or to and from food locations using the wind. I had dialed him in based on the wind directions, when I thought he was bedding and where I thought he was feeding. And I arrowed him the first week of bow season. I believe that was September 21st, 2012. One of the really interesting things about this buck in particular is I took this long route around to access the area that I killed him from, essentially. And I was really trying to thread the needle with where the wind was blowing, where I thought he was coming from bedding wise. I kind of operate with the mindset of do everything I can that increases my odds. I remember getting dressed, I'd parked my truck on the backside of this hill. I had about a 3/4 mile hike to get to the stand location, carrying a stand, a climbing tree stand. And I had all my clothes laid out. Before I put them on, I keep them all in my scent-free tote. A lot of times I'll treat them with ozone before the hunt. I do my scent-free shower. But I know you really can't beat a mature buck's nose. It's just a matter of reducing your scent signature. And I'm looking at the ground, and there's corn silage, like overspray when they chopped on the ground, and then they had spread a thin layer of manure on top of it. I'm like, oh, this has got to be pretty good cover scent. So I kind of just kicked all this stuff on top of my clothes, rolled my clothes up, shoved them in my pack, or strapped them in my pack. And I walked this 3/4 mile, again, early season, basically in my underwear, my really thin wool base layer. And then when I got about 100 yards from where I was gonna set up, before I entered the woods, I got dressed there, slipped in, and got set up. And I don't know if that saved me or not, but how that played out was a few does came in first, and then a smaller buck came in, and then he came in last, and they all kind of worked by me and got downwind. And of course, in the final moments, he's hung up at 20 yards facing me, and I've got no shot opportunity. And these other deer, I can see them out of the corner of my eye, and they're just kind of looking. I can't tell if they're interacting with one another or if they see me or smell me, so I was starting to get really nervous. And then ultimately, something caught his attention in the woods behind him, and he turned just enough. I was able to draw and take a steep quartering 2-shot, but my shot angle got double lung liver, and he went down almost immediately. So it worked out, but I don't know if that little creative cover scent tactic worked, bought me a little bit of time, but it's something that I often utilize if I'm crossing the field and there's manure, or if I'm crossing a pasture and there's a cow pie, I will rub it on my boots just to kind of cover my scent. It's a natural scent that they smell. So this buck here, if we're throwing some specs out there, I think he was 23 inches inside. I talked about really wanting to kill a big mature 8-pointer. This buck obviously is that 150 class 8-pointer. Really fun deer to hunt. I had a few really good encounters with him throughout the season. This was 2 years ago, 2023. Had some really good encounters with him throughout the season, and ultimately ended up having to go to him to kill him. And what's interesting about this deer, actually, I talked about all these other people that hunt our farm, the family farm that I grew up on. For most of my life, I was always looked at as the lucky hunter, or, the kid, because I started that way. I was the kid with a BB gun or a stick following adults around the woods trying to pretend like I was a hunter. So I think that my older cousins and uncles always still actually saw me as that like lucky or wannabe hunter, right? And that's what I would hear all the time. Oh, Thomas is so damn lucky because he killed that deer, whatever it might be. But this buck right here actually really changed that perspective within our hunting camp. And the reason for that is I made the decision in 2023 to share every move that I was going to make throughout the bow season with my other cousins and uncles that were hunting the farm at the same time. And I wanted to prove to them that I wasn't hunting purely off of luck, right? So I would say, I'm going to go here because I think that buck is here and he's going to do these things. And then I would have an encounter with him and I'd get it on video and they'd be like, oh, okay, that makes sense. The day that I killed this deer, or more so the night before I killed this deer, it was again the weekend before opening day of rifle season. So for me, if you look at the deer that I've killed, most of them I kill early season or the weekend before rifle season. And I think the reason for that is it's kind of the tail end of peak rut. It's not really post rut, but kind of. And the bucks have mostly peeled off of does and they're kind of back into a little bit more of a routine, but they're less visible because there's so much more pressure and all the things that come with it. But also that's my last ditch effort before the Orange Army rolls in and stirs everything up. So a lot of times I'll get significantly more aggressive that last weekend before rifle season. And this buck, the night before I went after him, I had the conversation with my cousin. We were both down at our hunting cabin, and it went something along the lines of, I had hunted 9 all-day sits in the last 15 or 20 days, hunting the fringes of bedding areas, trying to find this deer. Knowing that if I got in this spot, I couldn't get out during the day, so I would just sit out the whole day. And if you've hunted all day sits, you know how exhausting that can be. And basically I was getting burnt out. I told my cousin that my theory was this buck had shifted back into his early season range in this protected, hard to access bedding area. The following day, it was a Sunday morning, or was anticipating Sunday morning. It was supposed to get really, really windy, south winds, and it was going to warm up exponentially. So I basically said, I'm not going to hunt. I'm going to go scout instead. And my goal or my plan was to still hunt the fringe of this bedding area and see what I could see. Best case scenario, I find this deer in the bedding area and make something happen. Worst case scenario, I bump him out of there and my cousin would be set up at the end of the valley in his favorite spot to hunt anyways. And I would put this deer running right into the wind and put him right in his lap. And somewhere in between there, the goal was to scout and hopefully come up with a game plan to maybe make one more aggressive move before rifle season hit. Long story short, I slipped into there utilizing my spot and stalk skills that I've acquired over the years, right? And I ended up finding this buck bedded down and was able to make a move on him. It took me 4 hours and 15 minutes and I got to 37 yards and actually shot him in his bed. So unforgettable hunt. But again, to me, the best part about it was sharing it with the rest of my family and, kind of proving that I was making calculated decisions and not just going out hunting purely off of luck. So this was a huge deer. He field dressed at 265 pounds, only 150 inch rack, if you want to say that, everything's relative, but he put a lot of energy into his body over the years. He's just a big beast of a deer. So really cool, really just, a unique deer in general. especially for just being an 8-pointer. And then from there, we go to what I think, at least as of a couple of years ago, was the number 2 all-time archery kill in the county. That one, I believe, is number 8. So they're right up in there. But this was the infamous or famous buck known as Candyman. This was a deer that a lot of people ended up knowing about, had a lot of history with him, a few years, but he was just super elusive deer. Another early season kill, 214 gross inches on this deer, and actually I think he was bigger the year before. For every one of these deer in this room, there's 10 or 12 failures that taught me what I needed to know to be successful one time. But this deer was just, it was an incredible animal. The hunt itself was pretty wild. I actually had just gotten back from hunting out west. I killed an antelope. It was the summer that my firstborn child was born. So we had just a couple-month-old baby at home, leaving my wife and dogs at home to go hunt out west. And then I come back and, within a couple of days, it's opening season of bow season here in Wisconsin. And I was dialed in or felt like I was pretty dialed in on this deer. I get all the way back to the farm and go out to my spot. I'm all ready to go, first hunt of the season, and all the doubts are kind of going through your mind, and I go slip into the spot, check this trail camera. I'm sitting on my climber at the base of the tree, scrolling through the pictures. Almost all of the pictures are of him or a couple other bucks. So that told me right then and there that I was close to a buck bedding area because it wasn't loaded with pictures of does. Just that pinch point in general, wasn't a lot of deer traffic through there. It wasn't that great. It was kind of the end of one of these fingers, again, pointing in the direction of going off of our property. I toyed with the decision of slipping back out of there and going home. And, I just debated so long. It wasn't that long, just a few minutes, but a few minutes can make or break a hunt sometimes. And it almost did in this situation, because by the time I got up in the tree and got myself strapped in, and I heard him jump the fence. Right away, I could look down through the foliage, through the leaves and the trees, and I could see this big palmated side. It looks like a hand, and I knew right then and there it was him, and he was already like 18 yards away. I'm kind of freaking out, trying to figure out, can I even make this shot? Can I even make this happen? Or should I've got my video camera in my hand. I had just snapped it into the camera arm. Should I just turn it on and get some video of him? And, that thought disappeared quite quickly. I was like, I got to get an arrow in this deer. Basically, he came in, and I drew on him right away because I thought he was going to pop into this gap 15 yards away. As I come to full draw, he turns and he starts to kind of go straight away from me up towards this cornfield that's about 20 yards away and kind of disappears out of sight. I can just barely see him milling around, but I can't really make him out. So I go to let my draw down, I get about halfway, and I look over my shoulder, and there's this little buck standing there just staring a hole through me. So now I'm stuck at half draw with my bow, can't move, this buck's staring at me. And I always tell everyone that no matter how skilled you are, no matter how much time you put in, there is always an element of luck in every hunting situation. And my element of luck in this situation was that I just happened to catch a tree branch from a little maple sapling in the cable of my climber when I was climbing up. And not even catch the whole branch, but must have just caught a leaf. So at this moment that I'm frozen here at half draw, don't know what to do. I'm literally holding my cams as they're trying to break over, fighting them. This little buck staring at me. This leaf comes disconnected from the climber, and the sapling snaps up and just goes. And it was just enough that little buck went from me to that tree, stared at the tree for a second, and then was like, oh, it's not a threat, and went back to browsing and doing his own thing. So then I just came back to full draw, and here at the same time, this guy's coming back in from the field edge, and now I'm looking, okay, where's my shot opportunity? Where's my gap? Okay, there's my gap right there. How far is it? Did I set my pin? What's my pin set at? Sometimes I shoot at 80 yards of my house. If it's at 80 and he's at 20, I'm screwed. I'm thinking all these thoughts. He steps into that gap, I stop him, and I could not get my pin on him. My pin was frozen. It was just frozen right at the base of his belly line. There was nothing I could do to bring that pin up. I fought so hard mentally and physically to bring that pin up, and last thing I remember is bringing that pin up, pulling through my shot, seeing that lit knock going right at the white on his belly, and everything went black. For a split second, everything went black. I heard a crack, came back to, see this buck running off. I see the arrow stuck in a tree. The knock's not lit up, so I don't know what's going on. And I'm just freaking out. Just freaking out. My first thought was, Thomas, you just shot an antelope at 63 yards, and now you can't hit a pie plate at 20 yards. And I was just it was such a mental battle. That roller coaster of hunting was in full effect at that moment. Ultimately, I got down and I went over and checked the arrow, and he was basically eye level with me with how the hill laid out there. And the arrow, because it had smashed in the tree, the knock exploded, and that explained why there wasn't a lit knock. I can see his tracks, there's no blood, there's a little bit of fat on the arrow, so it really made me worried. Ultimately, it ended up being a perfect shot. It just worked out that way. And he only went maybe 45 yards before expiring. Obviously huge sigh of relief there, but then at the same time, it's like, you have so much time invested in a deer like this. He really pushed me to improve things on our property, which has paid off tenfold since then, but really pushed me to understand more about the property, pushed me to communicate more with the neighbors. And at the same time, everyone in the area that knew about him was hunting for him. And because of that, we had a handful of years following, or around the same time and then following, where there was a lot of really good mature bucks in the area because people were holding off on younger deer. So that's kind of all snowballed since then, but it's amazing. I always tell everyone when they ask me, like, oh, what are you chasing this year? It's usually, oh, I'm on one, I've got a target, whatever. Or it'll be, nothing that's worth pissing your wife off over, right? It's like, so then you're kind of picking and choosing your hunting a little bit more strategically versus, I don't care what's happening at this point in time. If the wind is the way I need it, I'm gone. I'm out in the woods, right? And that was this situation. That was this deer. So this is my 2025 archery buck. He's actually, I don't know how to phrase this. I mean, not to brag too much, but he was actually my number 2 buck, which I guess is a really good problem to have. My number 1 buck, this was his shed from last year. He was all busted up last year, and this is all he was carrying. So if you can imagine this with one more year on it, that's what he was, a real clean, tall tine 10-pointer. I actually only hunted 5 times this year, and all 5 of my hunts I had encounters with my shooter bucks. So the first 4 hunts were all encounters with that buck. We played cat and mouse with him, and ultimately it came down to bad execution on my part. I tried to force a shot where I didn't have a shooting lane, had my bow torqued funny, combination of maybe misjudging how high to hold my pin, rough judging yardage, and ultimately I hit the buck high. He's still alive. He's got broadhead buried in his backside shoulder, but I must have just not got enough lung to kill him. They claim there's no dead zone there, and other people claim there is, but basically I hit him in that spot that you don't want to hit him. And he's running around, but ultimately this was my plan B buck. I had it made up in my mind that there was 0 chance I was going to pass up a buck with double main beams and 2 drop tines on him. I do actually think he's a younger deer in general, but just a gorgeous, super gnarly deer, 15 points. And say 15 scoreable points, but he doesn't really have any like small kickers or anything. They're all very pronounced points. He's already busted up a little bit. He's got a couple inches broken off on a few different tines. But this deer, the way he came in, he gave me time, and I wanted to get a better look at him too. So like in my mind, I was not in the like need to kill mode. It was more so like, I'm just gonna be patient, let this play out, and just figure out ultimately if I want to pull the trigger on him, although I was pretty sure I was going to, but just not rush into it by any means. This was just a few days ago, October 24th. My first morning hunt of the year. It was a very cool, crispy morning. I think it was 27 degrees. The night previous was our first frost of the fall. But I was set up on the fringe of a really high quality doe bedding area, kind of in a transition zone, and primary scrape there. I actually just went into that area a couple weeks ago, the day that I screwed up on my plan A buck. Or the following day when I confirmed that he was alive and healthy, I immediately started shuffling cameras around and getting prepped for his fall range, because I really thought I was going to kill him in his summer range, which ultimately I should have. But when I started prepping for the fall range, I went in to the edge of this bedding area, hung a set. It goes from really thick to just kind of open, but there's a lot of saplings and like small trees and whatnot. So these does came in, and 3 generations of does. It was a old mama nanny doe, last year's fawn, and then this year's fawn, doe fawn. And they all came in and were milling around behind me. And the tree I'm set up in doesn't have a lot of cover. It's basically a telephone pole. I mean, this area was all super close canopy, mature forest until about 7 years ago when we started cutting in there and improving the bedding and everything. And I'm doing everything I can to not move, to not get busted. But they're, one of them's bedded, the other 2 are milling around right underneath me. When the buck comes in, I knew right away I had to make the choice of trying to bust these does now or risk them busting me when the buck is a lot closer. But I was worried to pull up my binos, and I didn't get any video of these does or anything because I just didn't want to risk the movement. But at that point I was like, all right, I'd rather bust them now
So I grab my binos, pull them up. I don't even look through them yet. I just kind of pull them up and I'm looking down at the does, and sure enough, right away, the old nanny does just got me pegged. She's looking. My wind is good, blowing away from them. Buck's coming straight at me, wind's blowing away from him too. So I just put my hand down and kind of flag behind the tree. And it's enough that it startles the doe, and she just kind of runs, stops, looks back, blows a couple times, walks down the hill, blows a couple times, and trots off. And the younger doe followed her, and then it was probably 2 or 3 minutes later, the little doe, whom I assume saw me moving around a little bit more, got up and took off running too. So then I get eyes on him, and I've had this happen before with these bucks. It's a lesson for everyone. When a doe blows, it does not scare the bucks away. All it does is put them on alert, at least in our area. And I go out and I'll do observation sits on field edges. Other times you're hunting. Does blow all the time at other does. They blow all the time at young bucks, especially during the rut. You'll have a young buck dogging a bunch of does, and they'll be blowing at them. So the blowing, it just puts these bucks on alert. And mature bucks anyways, a lot of times, I've seen it so many times where they'll stand in cover and monitor the area where they plan on going to next. And they just stand still for 20 minutes, sometimes hours. And they just stare, they don't move. So I just froze and just kind of watched him through the binos. Got a little bit of footage of him, I think. And then eventually he came in a little bit closer and he stood for a while, looked around, and you can see them, they're licking their nose and the saliva's just dripping. They're trying to scent check everything. And he's circling the downwind side of this bedding area. So it's the script that I wanted him to play, right? But eventually he committed to the scrape. It wasn't until he committed to the scrape that I grabbed my bow and he started working the scrape, and I was just kind of watching his eyes and moving when I thought he was moving or looking away, and was able to take my time and get a perfect 25-yard shot on him. And I think he only went like maybe 40 yards. I never had to stop him, so he wasn't on alert from that. It was just kind of a whack, and he ran, didn't know what hit him, and expired real quickly. So everything you want in a bow hunt for sure. But yeah, this is a buck we called Tumbleweed, as you can see just from how gnarly he is. And that's my 2025 buck. So that's it. That's the trophy room. When you're watching this, if you're watching this right now, we're prime rut time. So if you're still grinding it out, stick with it. Things can happen at any moment, and that's part of the game, I guess. So good luck to you guys hunting. I gotta go. I gotta help some clients figure out how to get on some deer and actually start putting pieces of the puzzle together for next year already. So thanks for watching.